what I kind of like to hear is like along your professional journey, like what were the really difficult decisions? What were the big obstacles? Like what were the things that people don't think of when they think of somebody pursuing sports, or when they see a guy on TV who just looks like he's like got the snappy suit and he's got the makeup and he's got everything? Like, what are the things that you had to do along the way that people don't know about? And I guess you can plant the flag of wherever you want that story to begin and take me to basically where you are, like at least to where like you feel like fuck, I really made it. Like I'm to a point where I'm able to make some choices now.
There's a few things, and it really all of them came with time. I think the first big decision that I had to make was, do I want to leave everything I've ever known and loved for my entire life, 30 plus years, and move to a place that I've never been to, never even driven through? That's literally 1,000 miles from everything I've ever known and loved, and be pretty much out there by myself for the sake of pursuing a career. That was the toughest
Which
decision
is
I ever
Arkansas,
made.
by the way, for
Which is Arkansas.
yeah.
I had never driven through Arkansas. I'd seen it on the map a bunch of times. I knew who the Razorbacks were. I remember in '94 when they won the national championship with Nolan Richardson as their head coach and Corliss Williamson and Scotty Thurman. I remember those details, to where I had to make this decision if I wanted to move to Fayetteville and become the person covering, the University of Arkansas basketball, football, and every other sports team they have. By making that decision, by the way, the information that I retained in my mind, getting to move to Fayetteville, having a chance to cover the Razorbacks, interviewing Nolan Richardson in his home on his ranch in Fayetteville, and playing with his Great Dane for about a half hour, which is one of the most exciting experiences of my lifetime. And also meeting Scotty Thurman, who hit the game-winning shot in 1994 to beat Duke, because I grew up a Duke fan. And the first thing I told him when I interviewed him is, I was like, yeah, I grew up a Duke fan. So I remember crying after you hit that shot. He goes, man, that was the greatest moment of my life. He was like, so the fact that it made you that sad makes it even better. And we shared a laugh about it. And it came to happen that Scotty Thurman was one of the coolest dudes I ever got the chance to talk to. And Nolan Richardson was he's just a gracious human being. So knowing those little bit of tidbits of the place I'd never been to, and making that decision ultimately to say, this is what you worked for. This is what you've wanted to do all along. Now you have the opportunity. I think the decision really became cemented for me when I got a chance to talk to Guy Junker about it. Guy's one of my mentors. I started out producing for him in TV and in radio. And we had worked together for so long. And he's like, look, he's like, as much as I love working with you, I love you as a person. I said, I know, Guy. He said, as much as I enjoy working with you, take this job and get the hell out of here. This is what you were born to do. You've worked so hard to get to this point. You've given some of the best years of your life to get to this stage in your career. Take it and go. This is an experience that when you look back at it, you'll relish it the rest of your life. And he was 100% correct. It was one of the best decisions I ever made, was to go and take that job in Fayetteville. I was there for 2.5 years. And that, in some ways, I still miss living there. I definitely miss the weather for certain, because I moved there in, late December, early January, and it was 60 degrees and people were out golfing when I moved into my apartment complex. that I miss. But there were just some really awesome experiences that I had there. I talked about Nolan Richardson and being on his ranch. That's one of them. It's not every day you get to hang out in the Hall of Fame coach's house at his invitation. That's insane. But just the experiences that I had there and the things I was able to do and the things that enhanced my career so much more were part of that decision where, it's a life decision, but if you make the right one, it makes it better. It doesn't, make it worse, or it doesn't make it regrettable. Another thing I had to learn was just the value of the decisions you make in your own life. When you're working on the news, one of your biggest priorities is to not be in the news. You do not want to find yourself in a situation where you're getting in trouble doing XYZ, or you're around other people that are doing XYZ, because if something happens with them and, it becomes a big issue, then you're wrapped up in that. And for me, it was like, hey, I got to be careful who I hang around. I got to be careful of the company I keep, because you don't want to have something happen that you were privy to when you're not supposed to be in the news. You're supposed to be on it talking about what happened, not being involved in what happened. So just from a personal standpoint of just personal responsibility and making the right decisions. And there was a time when that almost caught up to me. I had an incident where I'd gotten a speeding ticket, and it was maybe a few months after that I'd moved there. But in between when I got the ticket and when my court date happened, I moved addresses and I forgot to forward my mail. So my summons for my court date went to my
Oh,
old address and I never got it at my new one. So my court date came and went. I didn't know when it was. I'd totally forgotten about it. So another day, I get pulled over in a different town, but in the same county. Uh, Officer looks up my driving history and says, "Hey, you have an outstanding ticket in this town, and there's a warrant for your arrest." I spent the night in jail. Local sports anchor spent the night in jail because of a speeding ticket that I had forgotten that I didn't receive because I had forgotten to forward my mail and update my information. And a competing station found out about it and actually tweeted it out. And it was all over the place. So you had people calling my station saying, "Hey, did you know your sports anchor was arrested?" And it was to the point where, God bless our producers and the fact that I was friends with them. One of them kind of joked, they're like, "Yeah, our sports anchor's a badass. Thank you for calling us and telling us good night." Just kind of hung up the phone. But it looked so bad on the surface. I'm like, yeah, I got a speeding ticket that I didn't get the summons for because I moved. So I went to my second court date, got everything straightened out. I told the judge, like, "Hey, I got my ticket. I moved. Had I known, I would have bbeen here. Whatever. We got it sorted out. I paid my fine and got everything going." And it was just a matter of, what, that's a lesson learned. You have to make the right decisions because you don't want to have those things come back to hurt you in the end. And it's not like it was anything that serious. I mean, it's not like I'm out here trying to, rob somebody or anything like that.
right.
But something that small as a speeding ticket and not forwarding my mail became a much bigger situation than it needed to be. So personal responsibility becomes really important. The third thing, and I would say probably the thing I remember most, is that everything you've done previously, you may discount some of those things, but all the experiences you have, they bring you to the point you're at now. You'll get to the point where you have to make a decision and you might have done something before that you have to harken back to say, "Hey, I've done this before. I've been in this position where I know how to handle the situation," or I've taken some things from that experience that allow me to handle the situation. So something that might have been unforeseen, you can draw back from something else you've been through and say, "Hey, I'm more prepared for this than I think I am."
Yeah, like drama, right?
Exactly, like the drama being ready for being on camera thing. But sometimes you have to give yourself more credit for your journey because you've been through some things and you think you come to something that you don't know how to handle. There's always something you can draw from, either something or someone that you can draw from to help you get through just about anything. And I say just about with a very specific asterisk, but there are always points and experiences in your life or people that you've come across that can help you get through some of the unforeseen things. You just have to, remember it. And once again, give yourself credit for your journey because it helped you get to this point. And in some cases, it can help you get to the next part too.
Did you have any do you have any issues breaking back into the Pittsburgh market?
No, strangely no. And I think part of it was just luck because when I got back to Pittsburgh, I got a phone call and I had two different places that I had worked previously that were interested in bringing me back. They had heard I just moved back and they're like, "Hey, we got jobs available if you want them." And I'm like, "Sure." I ended up landing with Trib Live Radio, and largely because I had done some work with Trib Live Radio before as like a fill-in host or a co-host or whatever. So I worked with a lot of those guys. When I came back, it was literally the same crew that I remembered. I was working with the same producer, Mike Barker. I was working with the same guys on the morning show, and Guy Junker and Ken Laird. I was producing for them. And then once he got added to the roster, Tim Benz comes in, whom I had actually produced for in TV. So these were all guys that I had known previously. So I might have had the easiest reinsertion into a market because I went back to a place where I already knew everybody involved. And that's where the power of relationships comes in because you never know who you'll come across later on down the road. it just so happened that the guys that I'd worked with before and had such a great relationship with, I get to work with them again. And it was like being around old friends, to the point where, a year or two in, I'm like, man, you couldn't have asked for an easier transition. It felt like sometimes like I was stealing the paycheck, because people would ask me, what do you do? I'm like, I sit in a chair and argue about sports with my friends for a living. That's what I do. That's what it felt like, because that's kind of how it was. And I was lucky in that regard, where I had guys that knew me so well and that I knew so well, and that they really just helped make that transition so much easier. So I probably didn't have it as easy as most. But then on the TV side of things, I got to work with people who were super inviting and just really, really accommodating, and, getting to have that mentor relationship with Bob Pompiani, and meeting him for the first time. And he says, "Oh yeah, I saw your tape. You do great work." And I'm like, what? Bob Pompiani, like the freaking goat in the sports media market in this town, is
Because
telling me he
pumping
likes
ain't
my
easy,
work.
baby.
Bob, it ain't easy. And I've worked with that man. I've produced with him, and I've seen how his schedule is. Hey, you want to talk about people who can function on little rest? No one does it better than that man. Bob
I
Pompiani
was
is
literally
awesome.
thinking of him when I crafted that question.
Yeah, I mean, people joke pumping ain't easy. That man, he makes it look easy. But having him as a mentor to just learn how, not just how to do certain things, but how he conducts himself just in public, and where he goes, and how he handles every obligation that he has. It's a masterclass, man. If you didn't know how to be a public figure before, hang out with him for a week. You'll figure it out. It's crazy, because we would have days where we'd have our dinner break, and we just like walk from the KDK studio downtown. We'd go to Market Square and get something to eat. And I'm like, if you want to feel little as a person, go hang out with somebody that everybody knows when they see them. Go out to dinner with Pomp. Everyone's like, "Oh, hey, Bob Pompiani," and I'm like, I'm gonna shrink over here in the corner,
I
because
gotta pee.
no one
Gotta
knows
go.
who I am. Like, yeah, I'm like, oh, I'll wait for people to know this guy. So when I got to the point where I had been around a couple of years, and now I'm out with my wife, and I might be like at Walmart or the grocery store or something, and someone recognizes me, and my wife is just like, "Is it always like that?" I'm like, "Not always, but for the most part." She's like, "Does it ever stop being weird?" I'm like, "Not really. You just learn how to handle it better." But I think seeing him in that element, and how well he handles it, and also being with Guy Junker, you would never know that Guy Junker was, that recognizable, and had been doing this for decades, and having been, that identifiable by how he interacts with people. And it taught me to, just because I do XYZ doesn't mean I should just assume that everyone knows who I am. So I go out not assuming that anybody's going to recognize me. So to this story, I'm out getting dog food for my dog at PetSmart. I'm walking out with this big bag of dog food on my shoulder. Some guy's like, "Hey, Josh, what do you think the Penguins are going to do tonight?" I'm like, "I think they're going to win." And they're like, "You think they win the series?" I'm like, "We'll see what happens when they go back to Nassau." I'm glad I answered that question that way, because we saw what happened when they went back to Nassau County Coliseum. They did not win the series. But I'm walking out of a pet store with a mask on, not expecting anybody in the world to recognize who I was. But it's one of those things where you never assume anything, because the moment you do assume, you're probably going to embarrass yourself, and people are going to think, "Oh, what a jerk," because he just thinks he's entitled to stuff. I've been able to work with people who have taught me how to conduct myself, and it makes all the difference in the world. But having that kind of mentor relationship with Bob Pompiani made that transition easier at KDK, and it's been good since then. So it's kind of hard to realize that in a couple months it'll be 7 years since I've been back in Pittsburgh, and it disappeared. I came back and picked up my career and got married, and now I have a kid, and life has totally resumed itself, and kept moving. And I think it's largely because of just having a really good situation where I was comfortable with people that I was working with, whether I knew them or not, and then having the lessons that I've learned along the way to kind of make that transition easier. And I wouldn't have imagined it going any smoother in my mind. I couldn't have planned it any better.